Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of It's Not You, It's the Media. My name is Madhuri, and I'm joined, as always, by my wonderful co hosts, Bhakti Shringarpure and Suchitra Vijayan. Hi. Today, our episode is called If Op-Eds Could Kill. And it might sound familiar, and it is the sort of a part two of our episode If Book Reviews Could Kill. And we will be examining op-eds, opinion editorials, and their role in policy making and opinion shaping. As always, we'll be focusing on liberal media and the opinion writers who have really steered public opinion in the past 2 decades or so. So let's begin with thinking essentially about what an op-ed is. There's really not much to say here other than they are opinion pieces, and every newspaper has opinion columnists who are experts in their field. Their role is to generally echo the newspaper agenda in perhaps a different sort of tone. The New York Times, for example, has opinion columnists ranging from, where do I even begin? Like Thomas Friedman to Paul Krugman to Maureen Dowd to David Brooks, who all have their areas of expertise on which they comment. The Washington Post has theirs. And interestingly, actually, I do want to bring up how valuable an opinion section of a newspaper is, given that when Jeff Bezos took over the Washington Post, he fired the opinion editor, gutted the entire opinion section, and said that there would only be op-eds. Op-eds critical of Trump would not be run. So it shows the value, the galvanizing value of an opinion piece. As we know, many opinion pieces and writers have taken us to war, brought us back from the brink of war, whatever it is. They have immense shaping power. They build consensus, and they really shape public opinion as well as government policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Madhuri. Yeah, that is a great summing up actually of the what you called, the word you used was galvanizing, which is exactly what opinion pieces can do. They have, and the reason they can galvanize is because they're so distinct really from the dryness of news reportage, because you can have a tone, you can have emotions, you're allowed to reference I version of yourself, you're allowed to tell an anecdote, which often columnists will do. You're allowed to fall into allegory, like Thomas Friedman did when he compared the entire Middle East to the animal kingdom, racist and disgusting as that was. And I think I would like to add the same thing that I said during the book reviews episode, where we said if book reviews could kill, because they do kill, by shaping opinion and galvanizing audiences towards a certain way of thinking about the world. And I said at that time that places like the New York Times, for example, or liberal media, they want to express that they have an expertise in a certain area, but they make sure that the persons they choose for this expertise is precisely someone who does not have expertise in that area. And it's an extremely strange, twisted, gaslighty thing that they do. So if you're going to be writing about Africa, the person is absolutely never an African, so there isn't a lived experience of Africa, and very rarely will have a PhD or something in Africa. And of course, here the person I'm thinking of is Nicholas Kristof, who has been seen as many as an expert on Africa. And then the second thing he's an expert on is gender and women. So it's really, it really just perfectly illustrates my point. There's, of course, Thomas Friedman, expert writing on the Middle East, and again and again it reminds me, of course, of a dear friend and former contributor for Warscapes magazine, Belen Fernandez, who wrote a book about Thomas Friedman, and the name of the book was The Imperial Messenger, which is exactly what he is. He's there shaping policy about Israel, pushing Israeli propaganda, but it's supposed to be through this sort of both sidey view of the Middle East. Sometimes he seems to care and stuff about Arabs, like, oh, they're suffering.
The only Arabs he cares about is MBS. And also, let's talk about the serious corruption that is integral to the op ed column writing thing. But more than that, I think what is important for us to understand is also what is considered opinion pieces and what is considered reported pieces. And something that I really wanted to bring up is finally, New York Times published a piece called 65 Doctors, Nurses, and Paramedics What We Saw in Gaza. Instead of placing it as a reported piece, which was double checked, source checked, unlike the Gettleman story about the rape hoax. They decided to publish this as guest opinion and not as a reported piece. Again, the title of the piece is called 65 Doctors and Nurses and Paramedics What We Saw in Gaza. And yet, this was published as opinion piece and not as a reported piece. And this is something that we really have to understand and think in terms of what is an opinion piece, what is considered an opinion that can galvanize, and what is considered bearing witness and truth that is actually not given the weight of a reported piece. So they also use the opinion column as a place to obfuscate facts with opinion. Then this becomes an opinion of 65 doctors and not what was reported on the ground.
Extraordinary. I didn't know that actually. Of course, why should I be surprised? But it reminds me that places like the New York Times, places like Washington Post, places like the Atlantic will again and again throw out these opinion pieces that suddenly are like really cool people, like a brilliant Palestinian writer or a great expert on something, and they throw that in there. And these people are saying something incredibly important that New York Times, for example, would have deliberately left out of their reportage sections and their news sections. And then they're placed in there. And just as I said again, because I'm just repeating myself from the book reviews episode, is that what it does, it makes them seem like they're reporting from all sides, you know and it allows them, and to use Madhuri's favorite line, allows them to launder their image. You have a piece in the New York Times from Hala Elan, the Palestinian writer, and then you get to say, oh, okay, look, we are representing Palestinians, or you get to write one thing on the ICJ case or against Israel for genocide, and you have the one piece, but you don't use the word genocide anywhere else. It's just somebody's opinion.
Yeah, and in the meantime, your regular columnists for the past 20 years, the people that I mentioned in my introduction, Maureen Dowd, I don't even know how long Thomas Friedman has been around and a columnist at the New York Times. They have, as you reminded me, Bhakti, they have literally pushed us, pushed America to war. They literally have. And so my question is, why are we even listening to these people? Like, why are we listening to these people when for 20 years they've been proven wrong again and again and again? Like, they've been proven wrong with Iraq, they've been proved wrong with Afghanistan, they will be proved wrong now with Palestine. So, how can newspapers continuously front them as experts whose words have value? They are not saying anything that has borne out in any way positively or successfully for American foreign policy. So I'm just continuously confused about how they keep fronting them as people that we still need to listen to.
I mean, this is a trillion dollar question, Madhuri, and none of us have answers for it, because to me, it's the same question as your friend or somebody, a relative who's in an abusive relationship and just won't leave the person. To me, it's like, I, I don't get it. Paul Krugman writes the same column every single year for elections, has the same dumpy economics that he shoves down everybody's throat. And here we go, like, Paul Krugman, this is what he said. It's like, dude, it's a copy paste from 4 years ago.
And why should we care? So, Chitra, I think you had this like really interesting analysis of Maureen Dowd on Afghanistan and on Karzai.
This was actually from a decade ago when I was in certain corners considered an Afghanistan expert because I'd spent time. Again, the fact that I'd spent a year made me an Afghanistan expert. So you can see what expertise really means in this part of the world. But this was an analysis I did almost a decade ago, which really looked at figures like Dowd, who were opinion column writers, who had the enormous role of shaping our opinion of what's happening in Afghanistan. And one of the key figures that they fronted as the right person to lead Afghanistan was Karzai. So between 2002 and 2003, all of these editorials, including the one that Dowd writes, really talks about Karzai as this Afghanistan's caped hero. He's called as this eloquent figure, brave and even heroic. Also, there's this talk about him being like a candidate for Nobel Peace Prize. Then you quietly see this shifting from 2003 to 2004, where an argument is put forth by Dowd and many other opinion column writers across New York Times and others, is that with the US true presence, by 2009, when President Obama comes to office, the newspapers have fallen out of love with Karzai. Now he's no longer the hero who is here to save, but he's called well intentioned, ineffectual, perceivably corrupt, nepotistic, hashish smoking leader in the helm of a disintegrating welfare state. And 400 op-eds was the ones that I analyzed. And you can very clearly see the shift in the arc. And all of these were opinion pieces that I analyzed from 2002 to 3 to all the way to 2009, 2010, when you can see this one figure who was being, really just, the op-eds can tell you how he became this hero to a hashish smoking man in the hell. I mean, Afghanistan has been a narco state because that's exactly what everybody who's occupied have done in order for them to extract from this place. But another thing that you also have to see is, and I hope we go into this, is the whole thing with David Remnick and what he did in terms of the New Yorker. The David Remnick op-ed that says that this is the most comprehensive piece of evidence really did help shape American liberal consensus to go to war. So this, for many of the kids who were born, this is almost 20 years ago, when after the invasion of Afghanistan, the United States starts creating consensus to go to war in Iraq. We were told that they're weapons of mass destruction, and really what you see are two key figures that really um, start this building of consensus. There's one guy called, I don't know if he's still here. There's one guy called Pollack who writes this thing. He works for the National Security Council, CIA, and he says the case for invading Iraq. After that, what we have is an op-ed. So again, his book is being consistently hawked by everybody across liberal media. In New Yorker, David Remnick called it the most comprehensive and convincing case for the use of force in Iraq. In New York Times op-ed, you have Bill Keller say something very similar, saying that surely this is the most influential book of the season. Slate similarly follows through, and of course Atlantic. And you just see is this man who is a figure who is selling you disinformation. David Remnick becomes the first person to authorize this misinformation in a New Yorker op-ed, and then everybody else follows through. And what you see is it. I mean, if I wasn't so angry, you would see how effectively the consensus system works. They really just fell in line.
They are messiahs of war, and they are just guardians of empire, and that's all they do. I mean, look at the extremely recent controversy with Jeffrey Goldberg and the Atlantic. I know it's not about an op-ed, but think about the things that everybody is op-edding about. So we have Jeffrey Goldberg, who's of course, whatever, Mr. Atlantic, one of the worst magazines. I mean, I cannot with them. A former IDF, of course, and he's part of this Signal chat or whatever. First of all, how did he get in there? Nobody wants to know. He's, of course, on everybody's Rolodex or whatever the kids call it these days. He's on the contacts list. He gets in there, and then all this stuff ensues, and then everybody is obsessed with this idea that he has endangered the lives of that this chat has endangered the lives of American servicemen. And meanwhile, what about the people in Yemen? No worry, no care. I hope the strikes went well. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. This is where we are.
They don't even say that, though. They don't even mention. There's no conversation about the strikes. Like, for example, I had a notification, a push notification from the New York Times on my phone. Hillary Clinton in opinion. When it comes to Pete Hegseth's Signal chat, it's not the hypocrisy that bothers me; it's the stupidity. Clinton writes. So, I mean, again, it's not the strikes, it's not the killing of the people. It's like it's like the cover up was bad. Like more people are concerned about the cover up than the actual. than the actual misstep, this thing. And so, I mean, it's just like, again, why do I care about what Hillary Clinton has to say about this? I have no idea. But it is this coterie of New York elites, DC elites, who are time and again, in these lofty positions, and just the American public has to accept their word as gospel, regardless of how many elections they have lost, how unpopular they might actually be, how terrible their opinions are. They are still, pushing this very out of touch elite agenda to the American masses. And it's almost like they are saying it reeks of a certain contempt and condescension, in my opinion, where it's like, sit down, listen to the experts talking. And they keep on fronting these people as experts, and they create this weird feedback loop where everybody else is sort of kept in this position of being kind of, not as smart, and we have to hear what these people have to say. And this is how they gaslight you. As you said, it's just a repeated gaslighting.
What I want to come in on is this conversation um, about how Democrats were saying that the Republicans do not have credibility because they consistently lied. And that brings us back to Hillary Clinton, who has throughout her entire career lied. She lied about being under fire in Kosovo. She lied about like her lies is what made the intervention in Libya possible. The amount of just disinformation, obfuscation that Hillary Clinton herself and her husband have done. Even most recently, Hillary Clinton went on this show called The View and made an absolutely ridiculous argument as how her husband Bill Clinton had given the Palestinians the roadmap for a state, and the Palestinians refused to take it. That anybody who knows history will tell you is a lie. Whatever Bill Clinton negotiated did not give the Palestinians even a map that they could rely on. So the fact that these people consistently go on and lie does not make Hillary Clinton any more of a credible interlocutor or an expert any more than the clowns that are now part of the Trump administration. These are just slightly more sophisticated clowns who still get the op-ed columns, still get the time to keep peddling their bullshit and lies.
New York Times publishes Tom Cotton. So let's really, like, what do they mean? How are they even gauging credibility over here? How? Everyone from Hillary Clinton to Tom Cotton has been in their pages. So what's going on?
Yeah, but I'm arguing that for me, the Clinton figure or the Cotton figure are exactly the same because they have all
Absolutely.
built a system of peddling disinformation, lies in the perpetuation of this imperial war and destruction. That's it. Some are just more good at convincing the liberal, the liberal elite, but really, they all peddle their own versions of disinformation. And,
Yeah, and
and
the Hillary Clinton phenomena just gives me palpitations because this is the most corrupt and the most war-loving person ever around. Every place she has a record. I still remember when I went to Palestine in the West Bank some years ago. I was by the wall. I mean, you can't miss it, the wall. And there were so many, like, just jokes from Palestinians themselves about, oh, Hillary, because she was going to be up for elections at that time and would be the first woman and all that hype around that. And of course, she's funded the wall, and everyone's like, oh yeah, she's funded the wall, she'll make it bigger, all of this kind of stuff. It was absolutely terrible. I think one of the things I want us to come back to is that, there is the sort of op-ed that deals a lot with foreign countries and foreign policy and drums up all this consent for war and violence abroad and foreignizes people. It's explicitly xenophobic most of the time. And of course, I'm coming off of having done a lot of research, in my academic life on Darfur and Sudan, and the amount of nonsense that Nicholas Kristof published again and again and again about the Save Darfur movement, the Save Darfur coalition, and running around screaming genocide at a time when people were arguing that we can't use this word in this context. There was a lot of debate around it. drumming up a lot of consent around humanitarian intervention, which we all know is that they just want war. They just want to send in troops. That's what they want. And then we have seen how it has continues to unfold with Gaza, how horrible it is. And of course, now everybody's mum on genocide. You can't use this word, not that. Israelis themselves are publishing stuff in their own newspapers, but no, they won't use the word. Not in the US. No, this word cannot be used. So there's the whole foreign element, but I wanted us to orient also to how horrible, condescending, elitist stuff can be, and racist, when it comes to local coverage, right, of the US itself. It is so painful, for example, to observe during the movement for Black Lives, when there were uprisings and people had taken to the streets. The kind of coverage that stuff got was absolutely appalling. And then now with Trump, we are getting all kinds of crazy stuff too.
Yeah. But also, I want to say that it is not just manufacturing consent for war, it is also manufacturing this idea and going against war on the country's poor, right? There is a system that literally wages war on this country's poor. And I use this word, the word poor is not a word that I take lightly or use easily. Vast amounts of people who are from working communities in this country across race are currently being devastated by what the economy is doing. And then, hold behold, the Wall Street Journal writes an op ed. When people are concerned, there are people right now doing 4 jobs and cannot make ends meet. There is a man who just went on television and gave an interview about him working a full time job and still being homeless. And what does the Wall Street Journal do about increasing prices, cost of living, and cost of eggs? It says to save money, maybe you should skip breakfast. And you know what is a photograph that they use? Photograph of an aisle full of eggs. I'm like, how? How can you be so deeply inhuman? These are not your almond moms eating 2 almonds and drinking bone broth a day. These are people who are working, who are on their feet the entire day. Eggs and the protein are some of the few cheap available options for them that is now doubled, tripled in price. And instead of thinking about the cost of living crisis and what's been done by successive administrations, what do you write? Skip breakfast? What war on poor is not only are you waging a war against people outside this country, you are also you hate the people in this country. You hate the average American in this country who is working so hard to just keep a roof over their head.
It's like Marie Antoinette to another level, right? It's like not even let them eat cake. It's like just let them not eat anything, and that's totally fine. And it also reminds me of when people used to chastise millennials, saying that they couldn't afford down payments on houses because they were eating too much avocado toast. It was a very oft floated economic theory as to why millennials couldn't afford home ownership. So the New York Times has often, I mean, I'm not saying I read an opinion in the New York Times about it, but it was a very prevalent opinion in the internet, at least.
No,
Uh,
it's very, these op-eds are often super anti-poor. And of course, I know the Wall Street Journal, for example, is horribly, horribly conservative.
The Wall Street Journal to me is an interesting observation because the paper is an interesting newspaper to consider as a study because they are generally, they have a conservative agenda, right? And so all of their op-eds have a conservative bent to them. Um, and this to me is like a weird capture of a newspaper, but at least I kind of know what I'm getting with the Wall Street Journal. But with the New York Times and the Washington Post so far, what has really upset me is that they present themselves, they have this veneer of, oh, the news that is fit to print, and they are so dignified and they are so elite and they have all this rigor when it comes to their journalism, and they trade on that to push this conservative agenda while sort of masquerading it as, or sort of making it masquerade as a liberal progressivism. And that is what really upsets me. And they do this also, as you said, Bhakti, by throwing in the one or two, Palestinians here, one or two people who are anti-war. So it really is a sort of very deeply well thought out, viscerally sort of provocative way to gaslight a public into thinking, well, Wall Street Journal, they're conservative, but when we tell you this, there must really be something to it, right? Because they have carved themselves out this space of sort of hallowed ground. And so when they say something, then we should listen to them. It's kind of like they have really understood the power that these opinion makers have, and they are really able to wield it quite masterfully against everyone, and from a real position of like being really holier than thou the entire time. And so I will take a conservative newspaper and its conservative bullshit opinion pieces, because again, I really do know what I'm getting.
About the Wall Street Journal, should we talk about another one of the illustrious op-ed column writers, Sadanand Dhume?
Yeah.
Sadanand Dhume has written an opinion piece in February. He's a columnist, and his column is called East is East. And the title of this op ed that Suchitra was referring to is, "If Indians and Pakistanis can relocate, why can't Gazans?" Believe it or not. And it's extremely, I mean, I don't even have words to articulate the rage, but the subheading is, "Population transfers aren't a Trump innovation." I agree. There's plenty of examples from the 20th century, and then it goes on and on talking about all of these crazy, like it gives a historical veneer to this horrible inhumane thing, talking
Mhm.
about from the 1920s to blah blah
Mhm.
blah blah, blah.
We love a good population transfer, Madhuri. I
I
mean, I
mean,
don't even know what you're opposing here. I mean, so what if it looks like a genocidal death march? I mean, that's
it's
cool. It's
historical.
just a population transfer.
And it's simply historical.
What is the role of these people? Like, what is the role of someone like a Sadhanand Dume or many, many brown men in the years after 9/11 justified and wrote op-ed pieces that said, oh, Muslim men are highly likely to be terrorists, so it is okay to, make them stand in line, okay? The point is that there were many of them who jumped in the guise of offering a nuanced opinion or some different opinion from the non-white perspective, which for all purposes helped, justify this kind of violent hatred towards certain communities. Why would anyone want to? But you're also weaponizing someone's trauma. There are people who survived the partition. Partition is still unending and ongoing. The trauma of what started 70 years, 75 years ago is real today. And for you to take that violent moment of destruction and death for millions of people across the world, weaponize it, and reproduce it in a way for the subjugation and annihilation of another community is absolutely unacceptable. But he is not the only one, and there's so many of them. Maybe he is the most crass.
You think maybe Sadanand Dhume is the most crass of them?
I think he's the most crass, but it's like
No,
it's
let me offer you another person for your consideration. What about Tunku Varadarajan of the Wall Street Journal? Also, yeah, he's also an opinion columnist at the Wall Street Journal. And I'm just sort of looking at his The World After Gaza review, and it's really scathing of Mishra and the progressives. He says a progressive polemicist relies on predictable tropes to castigate Israel's conduct in its war in Gaza following the attacks of October 7, 2003. And the first line, can I just read a few lines?
oh, of course, please.
This is a review of a repugnant book. Okay. It seems almost trivial to point out that nowhere in The World After Gaza does Mr. Mishra describe the Hamas killers of October 7th as terrorists. They are gunmen in one reference, militants in another. A naive reader would be forgiven for thinking, on reading of this book, that Israel's war in Gaza was a matter of spontaneous combustion, of violence without cause. Okay? And not until page 34 does Mr. Mishra acknowledge that Palestinian militants murdered more than 1,000 Israelis. Then he says, why review this book? And he calls Mr. Mishra a vaunted progressive polemicist and the author of numerous books on race and empire, is a darling of the post colonial left. This work and others like it peddle, no wallow, in the same trite, poisonous, ahistorical ideas shared by the ideological descendants of Edward Said, that Jewish Israelis are settler colonialists.
They are. They are settler colonialist.
This is the kind of language that he's using against progressives and against
Yeah.
pro-Palestinians in the Wall Street Journal, by
Yeah.
bringing a brown person like Tunku to review Pankaj's book, which I
Yeah.
don't.
Can I be a devil's advocate here and just say, like, like, I know what to do with reviews and opinions that are so out there, but
Yeah,
what kills me is the genre invented actually by the Atlantic, where there is a sort of cuteness and a cultured cuteness, like, and it's odious stuff many
I
times,
agree. I
and like,
agree.
yeah, so things like how there is a more of a vegan movement among the Israeli soldiers,
Yes,
and they're
yes.
having a hard time, poor things, because they have to wear leather, to go kill people. I mean, we know the cannibalism and the savagery. I don't care if they don't don't do animal products or whatever. I mean, what is the point of this? What is this level of co-opting, humanizing, cutesiness, adorableness, making them adorable? I mean, this kind of stuff is just so insidious, because somehow it manages to be so off left field that you just lose track really of what it is they're defending. So to me, these are the worst offenders at the end of the day.
I agree. They're so insidious.
I
They
know.
are so insidious.
Anyway, I know that we can go on and on about how insidious these op-eds are, and of course, it's so sobering to know that even despite people unsubscribing from New York Times, despite there being a huge movement to stop following them and listen to them and so on, their following, their growth is just increased. They just keep moving and keep growing, and it's really painful to see. And what is sad about this particular moment that we are in is that what we are seeing now in the US, people are being disappeared off of the streets. There are
Yeah,
videos of deportations, videos of kidnappings, you know videos that are showing us exactly what the government is doing, right? And never before has it been more clear to any thinking person that the wars you wage abroad will always come home to you. It will always be in your neighborhood. I still remember people being like, no, you have to vote for Kamala Harris because at
yeah,
least on the domestic level it's going to be okay. Trump will mess up the domestic level. I said, you can't. We live in one world, and they all train each other, they all lubricate each other. We all belong in this one world. You can't be shielded from this anymore. Of course, the subject is always brown or black or whatever, but the truth is that the war is here, that the genocide in Gaza is now being replicated, being played out right here. People are being disappeared. And if you don't look at your local newspaper, if you don't think about what opinions have led us to this point, if you don't analyze and think more critically, we will never have a different world. And this is what is most shocking and upsetting to me about the moment that we're in.
yeah. Be a thinking person and remember it's not you, it's the media.